You're listening to Nightlight Radio Network. This is Dr. Bob Hieronimus, co-host of 21st Century Radio. We are happy to present this rebroadcast of our show on Nightlight. Greetings, 21st Century Radio listeners. This is Dr. Bob Hieronimus introducing tonight's pre-recorded show with great sadness. A few days ago, we learned of the passing of a great light in this world. With a soaring voice of an angel, on the wings of an eagle, may she rise to the heaven worlds. Joanne Shenandoah, our beloved friend and mentor in the ways of the Iroquois path of peace, has left her physical body for the world of the spirit, leaving behind the thousands who were touched by her grace and artistry and love. For several years, we opened every 21st Century Radio program with the voice of Joanne Shenandoah singing, "One world, one mind, one love we will find. On common ground peace will be found for all on earth." That sums up the message of Joanne Shenandoah. She will be sorely missed. Joanne Shenandoah was one of America's most celebrated and critically acclaimed Native American musicians of her time. She won a Grammy Award and was nominated for 2 others, plus multiple other awards for her music, both traditional and contemporary. A direct descendant of the famed Oneida Chief Shenandoah, who was a friend and ally of George Washington. Joanne Shenandoah is a founding board member of the Hiawatha Institute for Indigenous Knowledge, a nonprofit educational facility based on Iroquois principles. Tonight, in her honor and tribute, we are rebroadcasting an interview we recorded with her in 2011, where we talk about and play selections from her symphony called Skywoman, which is based on the Iroquois creation story. She is joined in this interview by her husband and true partner in this life, Doug George Kanentiio, who stays with us for the second hour of the program to focus more academically on his work, Iroquois Culture and Commentary. We will miss you, Joanne Shenandoah, she who sings, "You left the world a better place than you found it, and that is a life very well lived. Peace be with you." Now, we were just listening to a snippet from a song written by one of our guests this hour, Grammy Award winner Joanne Shenandoah, from her Skywoman Symphony, which we will hear more about in a few minutes. And in fact, all the music you hear tonight, in and out of the commercials, will be original music by Joanne Shenandoah. Now, before I introduce her properly, however, I want to give you just a little bit of information, background information on my interest in the League of the Iroquois. About a quarter of a century ago, my life changed radically when I learned the truth about where our founding fathers received guidance on founding this new republic. Now, it may not be taught in our schools, but there is no doubt that the League of the Iroquois Indians created a republic on this continent in 1142 A.D. There is overwhelming documentation to show that the Iroquois League taught our founding fathers George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Tom Paine, and many, many others how to establish a republic. Now, the greatest mistake our founding fathers made were leaving out 2 things the League said we must do: end slavery and give women equal status. Now, those failures have been the bane of not only America's existence, but also the bane of the rest of the planet as well. In my last 2 books, my opening chapters described and documented the importance of the League of the Iroquois, and every time I'm interviewed for the History, Discovery, National Geographic, Sci-Fi channels, Canadian, Russian, German television all over the planet, I've always tried to convince them to address this topic in their programs, but to no avail. Now, we will be taking a lot tonight, talking a lot, that is, about symbols and myths. So I want to say just a little bit about the oral traditions and how the symbols and myths are the key to our societal well-being. According to Carl Jung and others, symbols play a central role in the integration of the personality. They direct us to the center of our being. Mythology leads us to the missing part of the whole and mends our alienation from life. The absence of a symbol or a myth system leaves communities without formative agents and without basic foundations. thereby increasing instability and anxiety. And one of the reasons indigenous societies around the world have remained intact for centuries is the profound meaning they find in life. And the part of that is due to their oral traditions and emphasis on symbols and myths. Now on to the program. It is said that when Joanne Shenandoah sings on stage, the ancestors join her. Joanne is a member of the Wolf Clan of the Iroquois Confederacy and one of the most acclaimed Native American recording artists of her time. She has performed at Carnegie Hall, the White House, Kennedy Center, Earth Day on the Mall, Woodstock 94, the Parliament of the World's Religions in South Africa, and thousands, literally thousands of venues in the United States and around the world. She has performed or recorded with so many stars I can't begin to name them all, but just a few are enough to blow you away. Neil Young, Willie Nelson, Judy Collins, Jackson Brown, Chris Christopherson, Ray Charles, Bill Miller, Joan Baez, Emmylou Harris, and scores more. And she's performing with Pete Seeger next weekend at Clearwater in Croton on the Hudson. Also an actress, Joanne plays a major role in The Last Winter, a thriller film on global warming starring Ron Perlman. She's joining us tonight together with her husband, journalist and activist Douglas George. I think it's pronounced Kanentiio. Well, I probably got that wrong. Well, who I will introduce properly in the next segment because our time with Joanne is limited tonight. Together, Doug and Joanne have written a book called Skywoman, Legends of the Iroquois, illustrated by Dave and John Fadden, our mutual friend who connected us with so many great speakers on the Iroquois traditions. So thank you, John, and hope to visit your Six Nations Museum again in upstate New York in the future months. Joanne and Doug are joining us tonight to share the Iroquois legends with us through the song and story, and later in the program we will get into more history with Doug's book Iroquois Culture and Commentary. But right now, welcome to 21st Century Radio, Joanne Shenandoah and Douglas George. I think that was probably one of the longest introductions on planet Earth. Are you guys? Are you there?
Hello, yes, Dr. Bob.
Oh boy, it's so good to have you here, Joanne. Doug, you there?
I'm here too.
I am so much looking forward to talking to you both. We've been looking forward to this for, several weeks at least. Now, we're going to focus on Joanne's music in this first segment and play some of the pieces from her Skywoman Symphonic Odyssey of Iroquois Legends. Joanne, before we play the first piece of Skywoman, what would you like to tell us about how you were inspired to write this symphony or anything about your creative process when you write music?
Well, primarily, I feel very blessed to be given the gift of music. My native name is Iroquois, which means she sings. Now, my husband and I had put this book together. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the date. It's been a while ago, 1998, I think. And a good friend of mine came over from Germany. His name is Gerhard Riedman, and he visited us at a very sacred site called Ganondagan. And he said, "Joanne, this is in books in Europe. It's one of the world's sacred sites. I need to go there." And I was like, "Oh, that's just down the road." And
wow.
This is the place where they say the first clan mother is to be buried, or was buried. Her name was Jugunsase. And I started telling him about these beautiful stories and our legends and our creation story, how Skywoman came to Earth. And we spent the next, I would say, week writing songs for every single story in the book. And it took 12 years, but we finally did a full-on symphonic production with 68 members on stage with the Syracuse Symphony, and then finally recorded it with the New Mexico and Santa Fe Symphony. And it became a PBS special, which was aired nationwide. So it was a really, really an incredible blessing to be able to bring these stories to the stage first time ever. I don't think this has ever been done before, where a whole hour of legends of the, I would say, indigenous peoples of America were actually put on stage with a full symphony.
Well, congratulations. That's just extraordinary, both the album and the book. Wow, geez, unfortunately, I wish we had 6 hours tonight. But, okay, we are now going to play Skywoman, which is about 4 minutes long, and then we will come back to talk about this creation with you and George. Oh, that was just lovely. Doug or Joanne, we got a good overview of the Skywoman story from this song, but would you please fill in the blanks for our listeners who have never heard the tale of Skywoman before?
Sure. In essence, what it is it takes the arrival of the human spirit, which in our story traces it to another place. Now, one of the patterns that is carried over generations amongst the Iroquois people is that this is not the only planet that has human-like intelligence, that the Creator is seen as a type of gardener, a cultivator who takes human intelligence, the consciousness from the source, from the place of light, and brings it to different planets where it then is given certain responsibilities. And in our way of thinking, that origin of life has to be feminine, because that is, according to biological natural law, that's the one that is most logical and makes most sense to us. So the first human-type being is a female. The second human-type being is a female, and not till we get to the third generation do we introduce the life-taking element, the males, and that's at that point where trouble begins. And so this tells a story of not only how life came to this planet, but what is ultimately our destination once we leave this earth. We return back to the place of light.
The young woman's name is translated as mature flower. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Well,
exactly.
This is one of the most fascinating things about Skywoman and the story. Every one of the names, the mature flower, holder of heavens.
Yes.
Let's see if I can remember the snapping turtle. Well, that's and then of course when there are so many other extraordinary things within this system of mythology, and they're very uplifting. I'm sorry to talk over you. I apologize.
No, that's fine. It is a very positive story. It's a story that's defined by an amazing narrative and has high drama to it. It's a very exciting story. It's a very compelling story, and it gives us a sense of attachment and belonging to this earth, not just as indigenous peoples here, but humans generally. And what it does, very clearly, it defines what our duties and obligations are, not only towards ourselves, but to the natural world. And in the telling of not only that story, the great epic, but other Iroquois stories, it's, again, this is affirmed time and time again. We belong to this planet, and we have certain very specific duties towards her, that she is a living, conscious entity, a being in her own way. And that has to be stressed. That's most emphatic, that there's no separation between humans and the planet upon which we walk. And she's very conscious of our steps upon her.
Also, Bob, I'd like to add that many of the animals who gathered around her were very instrumental in bringing about what we call today Turtle Island, where they all tried, they all gathered about her, they did their best to try to make a place for her to land. And that's a beautiful thing. When you see, you see it happening today, even in our world, where, for example, when the tsunami hit in India, where the elephants were out there bringing people in. I mean, they have a natural ability to sense the fact that, we all need to live together in harmony and balance with each other.
Indeed, that is true. And let me hold up the illustrations to the microphone so our listeners can see some of these. I mean, because John and David did an extraordinary job. I'm telling you.
They did.
Oh.
They did. They come from a very strong artistic background, which is typical of Iroquois life. There's a heavy emphasis on the visual, on carrying stories across the generation using visual means. We used to use wampum belts and other forms of art, carvings, ceramics, things like this, all meant to carry the story of the storyteller to the people that are hearing it. And these stories, while there might be some minor variances, are fairly consistent over the endless generations since they first took place. And it's necessary for people to understand that these describe real physical actions that took place on this earth. And I'll give you one example. The scientists of the West are now discovering, or at least to their knowledge, that the moon is in fact a fragment of the planet, and it was spun off this earth and took its orbit, and over the years, took the form that it's now in. But in Iroquois, our Skywoman epic, it tells we already knew that. We knew that a section of the earth was removed from this planet, was hurled into the sky. And the challenge was, how do you describe that in a way that people would understand? And so it takes the form of the original human being, Skywoman, taking her daughter's head and putting it into the sky, where it would shine and provide its own light, and also watch over the flow of water throughout this reality. And we know that again, through scientific research, that the moon does control tides and other parts of our existence that involve water.
The cycles of women.
Cycles of women. And so that's, the story has a scientific basis to it. And once they do this drilling into the Earth's surface, they're going to find, or planet's surface, they're going to find that it does have water. We could have told them that.
Yeah.
And that what they're going to find is that water in the moon is consistent with the water in the Pacific Ocean from where the moon came from.
Oh, thank you so much for making sure you put that in there.
Sure.
That's super important, because I've found in my limited, I'm just a student. And being a student of this for just 25 years is not long enough for me to have any real deep comprehension of this. So it's just so wonderful to have people with us tonight that are in school. And you grew up with this. But we need to get to Grandmother Moon, or else we're going to run out of time. We're only going to listen to 2 minutes of it. My boss over there is looking at me. Isn't that right, boss? Yes. Okay. All right. Let's get to Grandmother Moon, because, boy, we have some wonderful individuals here. Gusts of wind, an ice skin, new tree, and, of course, mature flower plays a major part in this. We'll be right with you. Whoa, boy, friends, did you hear those words? They were like crystals. Jeez, oh whiz. That one, her changing face always measures time. Wow. I mean, this kind of stuff... Carl Jung would have loved this. He really would. In the interest of time, we need to get on to some translating of this. So, Doug, what would you like to tell us?
Well, Doug George is looking for a book for you at the moment.
Okay.
But I'd like to tell you that our Grandmother Moon, we have 13 ceremonies a year, and it's all based around the cycles of life. And everything that we do, from planting to birthing to sending someone on their journey to the spirit world, has to do with song and celebration. Mm-hmm. And we're very blessed to still have a lot of these stories, and our Creator-given gift to be able to share these with the world. So we're just thrilled to be with you tonight, Bob.
Well, when you're singing this, of course, knowing that your name really reads She Sings, you seem to, please don't be, I don't want to embarrass you, but you seem to be connecting right with the Earth Mother. And this process is really elevating to anyone who listens to those crystal sounds that come out of you in regards to this. And I don't want to embarrass you or anything, so I better shut up. But it elevates consciousness and awareness, and I'm certain you're sure of that, right?
I am very aware, yes, and I've been, incredibly blessed in that I've had the opportunity to do this for the last 20 years, and had some amazing experiences around the world. And it's a really a great thing. Doug and I have had a chance to travel from Africa to Korea to Spain to you name it, Australia. We've been all over the globe, telling people about our great messages of hope and of peace and of love, and how we are to live in balance with each other in the natural world. And that's primarily what a lot of people are seeking today is sustainability. How do we live on our planet when the rest of the world is concerned with it ending?
Mm-hmm.
We know our prophecy tells us that it will not end, and that we are very blessed to be able to help in that.
Well, that's the reason why I think it's so important today. It's so important today to hear these words and hear this music and look at these these drawings and paintings, which I think really elevated as well. What a great combination! Did Douglas come back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Did you find what you needed?
Yes, I did. So when we get into the conversation about specifics regarding how the Iroquois people interacted with their visitors from across the Great Saltwater, and storytelling was an integral part of that interaction, that we can go into that in depth. But I want to just emphasize what Joanne was saying, is that the Iroquois still retain the essence we do of our identity. We still have the speakers and the rituals which define us as a indigenous people, and that's very important. In these days of great transition and enormous cultural compromises brought about to us by activities like gambling, there's still little lights left across Native America. Still people holding out. Still people holding on to these stories, these legends, and these disciplines. And while most Aboriginal peoples in North America are on the road to some kind of fatal cultural compromise, the Haudenosaunee people, the Iroquois people, still carry on.
Indeed, and boy, that your book, Iroquois Culture and Commentary, taught me so much. And then after that, you knocked me off the chair with Iroquois on Fire. We have to do a whole show on that because, boy, it's sad to learn these things, but I mean, there's a big hole in my education, and you've really, I am so happy that I'm beginning to learn more about this. And
what's really important for your leaders, for your listeners to understand is that Native people, we have the same challenges as everybody else, in some cases even more so, but we're only viable as political entities, as Aboriginal sovereign peoples, insofar as we have some kind of distinct elements of our culture. It doesn't make any sense for us to claim sovereignty in one way, and in the other just surrender the essence of our heritage. And these stories, the Skywoman epic, and the dozens, if not hundreds, of other Iroquois legends, give us that perspective that define us as to who we are as a people, give us a sense of belonging to a specific part of Turtle Island. They give us meaning and substance, and that's why it's so important, and that's why Joanne and I elected to write this book. And while it's now, I think, in its sixth printing.
Yes, it is. It's sixth printing. It's gorgeous. Well, look, we need to take a break. Is that right, boss lady? And I was just wondering if Joanne could hang on just a little bit longer so that we can get to the other two songs. Is that possible?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, friends. Douglas George Goodpine is his name, and I think it's pronounced I should have asked him, of course. Kanentiio. Hey, thank you. And Joanne Shenandoah, and she sings. I couldn't possibly pronounce your name. But it's Skywoman, Legends of the Iroquois, Clear Light Publications. Iroquois Culture and Commentary is what we'll talk about, not next segment, but because we want to finish up on this. Plus, oh my heavens, the Grammy Award-winning music of Joanne Shenandoah, JoanneShenandoah.com. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. This is Dr. Bob Hieronimus once again dedicating tonight's broadcast to the late Joanne Shenandoah, who passed away last week at the age of 64. Joanne and her husband, Douglas George Kanentiio, have been our beloved friends and mentors in the ways of the Iroquois, and this hour we are rebroadcasting their interview recorded in 2011. Joanne was a promoter of peace through music. She performed for such noted leaders as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Mikhail Gorbachev, and at such prestigious locations as the White House, at 5 presidential inaugurations, Carnegie Hall, the Vatican, Madison Square Garden, and Woodstock 94. May she rise to the heaven worlds on the wings of the eagle. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm the allegedly Dr. Bob Hieronimus, and our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. And our engineer is A.Y. Warshaw. Now we're back with Douglas George, and he is Good Pine. That's his Mohawk name, Good Pine. Douglas George was born and raised in Akwesasne Territory and now lives in Oneida Territory. He is actively involved in issues affecting the Confederacy and has been writing about developments in Indian country for the past decade. An award-winning columnist, he has served as advisor, producer, and scriptwriter for national television documentaries on Iroquois subjects, in addition to co-authoring Skywoman, Legends of the Iroquois. With his wife, Joanne Shenandoah, he writes regular columns for the Syracuse Herald American and News from Indian Country. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees of the National Museum of the American Indian. And we're going to talk about his book, Iroquois Culture and Commentary. But first, I would like to get to one thing. Who is the Corn Maiden, and how is she important?
Well, corn, honest in Mohawk, was one of the gifts from the Skywoman. When she came from the other place, a place of light, she brought certain seeds with her, certain plants, and those are tobacco, corn, and strawberries. And corn is something that even today scientists are having a hard time figuring out where exactly it came from, because it doesn't have any immediate relatives in the other plant kingdom, or plant world, shouldn't say kingdom. But so the corn is something that is central to our existence and to our culture. And when our people see that it reaches a certain height, we gather together and give thanks specifically to the corn for giving us the means which we need to carry on. And we have elements and spirits that live within each specific plant, not just the Corn Maiden, but other elements, and we acknowledge them as well.
Well, most recently, a book has come out that we're sending a copy to you of, called Ancient Egyptian Maize by Dr.
Yes.
Gunnar Thompson. Oh, you're familiar with it?
Well, I know the exchange of information and ideas amongst and technologies amongst peoples on this planet is not something that is restricted to the European experience.
That's for sure.
But it has been ongoing for as long as there's been human beings, and the need to see what's over the next horizon or beyond the next hill. And in the process of doing this traveling about, we carry certain things with us, much like the insects will carry the pollen from certain plants, and that's what we do. So long before the Europeans developed certain ocean-borne craft that enabled them to circle this planet using the winds, other peoples had done the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's not surprising to us at all that you're going to find elements of Aboriginal culture in what is now the Mideast and in other places on this earth.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. You can sit in a bathtub on the northeast coast of Africa, and just the current just brings you here.
Yes.
It's not hard.
It is very, and see, that's one of the things that there's a certain type of ethnocentrism that takes place in Western ideas and philosophies and politics, and I understand why they need to create these myths that give them the attitude that somehow they are God directed or have the right to assume certain powers. And but logically, if we take it back to seeing people as they are as human beings, and yes, we see that certain things, certain common sense type of transfers took place. And one of the things that Native people realized in the Pacific and in the Atlantic was that the Earth moved in a circular manner, and as she does so, she moves the waters in conjunction with our grandmother, the moon. And the waters don't move in a linear type way. They move in a cyclical type fashion. And if you know how the cycle moves, then you can very easily find that stream and find yourself on a different part of the hemisphere. It's very easy to do. That's one of the keys to the Polynesians being able to go across great expansions of water. To go from Tahiti to Hawaii and then back from Hawaii to the western coast of North America. Just follow these currents. Mm-hmm. If you know that, then you can fairly easily get from one place to another.
Well, could you tell us the story of the twins and what that says about the need for balance in the world between light and dark and positive and negative?
Yes. Yes. You see, we're not restricted or hampered by a singular God, all-knowing God. We do have a creator whose face is unknown to us. In all likelihood, it's a feminine being. But in the process of creating, it requires that there has to be certain energy, certain tensions have to take place. The alpha and the omega, the positive and the negative, and that we express that perception of this great natural collision taking place, this great natural tension through our oral traditions. And we tell the story of how the twins, Oquilaze and Tawiskalon, Maple and Flint, were gestating inside their mother, and that there was tension even when they were in the womb. And one of them decided he would be born into this world in a natural way, and the other one elected to, in a hurry, come through his mother's left armpit, and doing so caused her death. When he emerged into this world, he had a darker kind of skin, a flint-covered skin, which is where he gets his name from. And on top of his head, he had a ridge of bone, which is where the famous Mohawk haircut comes from.
Yeah.
And that's what he used in order to cut his way through his mother. And as they developed as young boys and then to men, there was a great contest over the who would shape the destinies of the human beings and who would shape life on this earth. And but it was essential that they had this energy, this challenge between the two. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at the end, there wasn't any victor. Well, one was given the responsibility of introducing beauty and harmony and all good things on this planet, and the other one, in contrast to his brother, brought about things that consume good and beauty and harmony. Mm-hmm. And while one is a creature of light, the other one is a being who lives within the bowels of Mother Earth.
Well, in a lot of these stories, I noticed a repeated message from the celestial beings that humans have forgotten the ancient teachings to honor the earth and the Creator, and that this lapse is responsible, and I want to emphasize this, that's the lapse that's responsible for all strife and sickness. Please elaborate on this.
Yeah, that's true, and there's always in Iroquois thinking that the human illness and disharmony that exists within our minds and our hearts is one of the primary cause of sicknesses, and that the Iroquois approach to medicine, as remarked by the people who came and first visited us, was that it was a holistic approach to healing. It involved psychological counseling it involved dream interpretation. It involved physical therapy, and it involved a change of diet, all those things that we now associate with certain professionals were an integral part of Iroquois life at the time of contact. So we had all those elements. It wasn't Sigmund Freud who invented the idea of dream therapy. In our society, if you look at the Jesuit relations, they describe collective dream therapy taking place in our societies in the 17th century, but it had obviously been going on much, much longer than that, because we realize that unless you cure and unleash the powers of the mind, unless you have some kind of psychological reconciliation, then the physical tensions will remain, and it's almost all of our illnesses are related to just that. But not just us. It's we need collective psychoanalysis, and we need ceremonies that enable us to release that tension that often produces warfare amongst communities and certainly amongst nations. So we have very specific rituals for doing this.
Well, how do these celestial beings interact with humans?
Oh, and here's where it comes from. All human beings, the Creator loved human beings, gave us enormous talents. It gave us incredible sensory apparatus in order to enjoy this wonderful planet. What our duty is to take that experience and then bring it back with us as we journey back to this place of light. But each one of us has a spiritual component, not just a physical one. We know instinctively that something else constitutes human existence. It's not just the physical, and it's not God. It's something more profound and personal than that. There is a spiritual reality to everything we do, and there are spiritual beings that watch over us. And they could be ancestors from our past, or they could be other entities that look out for our well-being. But that means we have to develop a relationship with them. Where collective suffering occurs on this planet, and people say that all the time, how come we have to endure this great crisis? How come there's warfare, and how come there's suffering? Well, it happens when there's a disconnect between the spiritual world and ourselves in this physical reality that we define as our existence. So we have to acknowledge that the spiritual beings are there. They act as our guides, and when necessary, they can lend us specific assistance. Then when our time is over, they will escort us along that path of stars back to this place of light. That's what we're told.
So do they intercede to help individuals after prayer or supplication?
Yes, they can, if specifically asked.
If asked.
If asked. Now, this is very important. Whenever Iroquois effect healing, we make direct, specific requests to those spiritual beings to work with us as we approach healing. That's extremely important. And we're not praying to anything. We're not worshiping anything. What we're doing is we're simply acknowledging our gratitude, our reliance upon the other elements of creation, and then we're asking the spiritual beings to help us along as we go through this life.
Well, is there a concept of the great mother goddess in the Iroquois tradition?
Well, everything, life, what we call it, there are two, besides the twins, there's also the feminine and the masculine, the life-giving and the life-taking. And we designed our society in order to strive for a balance between that. So sometimes the life-giving element takes certain, I guess you would call, very powerful and profound form and physical shape. And when we gather together, we have something we call Hondo Galiwatekwa, which means the words that come before everything else. And during the course of this, we recognize that there are spiritual beings who exist on the edge of this planet, and sometimes they take physical form so that we can recognize them. We might call them prophets or goddesses or great teachers. We might call them Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King. But they are in tune with the divine, the spiritual, and they remind us of our duties and what our responsibilities are. So yes, at certain instances, it does take very specific feminine form. Mary Magdalene in the epic of Yesu, or Jesus Christ, is a good example of that.
Indeed, indeed. Much maligned. As well.
Much maligned,
Much
yes.
maligned.
And that's what happens when you take the integrity of stories as brought across a generation by elders, and then you take it and you put it into written form, and then it becomes doctrine.
Yes.
And then it becomes unwavering. Then it loses its energy and its color and its dynamics. When you take it from the verbal to the printed word, then it becomes absolute. And when it becomes absolute, people become wedded to that, and then it becomes restrictive, and then once that happens, it becomes institutionalized and then becomes a weapon.
It certainly has. That's one of the great values of an oral tradition.
Yes.
Which we'll hopefully be able to touch on a little later on. And my boss says we need to take a break here.
Yes.
Our guest is Douglas George, Good Pine. What a wonderful name, Good Pine, because now...
Yeah, it's a Bear Clan name from the Mohawk Nation, yeah. Kanentiio.
Because, that makes you of the same wood as the sacred tree.
Exactly, that's what it does, and that's the great responsibility. But like everything else, it's transitory. So I just borrow the name, and when my time comes, it goes back into the clan, and they'll give it to someone else.
Well, thank you for joining us again, and of course we'll return with Douglas George, Good Pine, and the book we're referring to at this time is Iroquois Culture and Commentary, Clear Light Publications. Friends, you got to get a copy of this book. You got to get. I'll tell you a little bit more about it before. And there's also a deal. Here's the deal. If you get a copy of this book, Iroquois Culture and Commentary, Clear Light Publications, and you can prove that you purchased a copy, you can have any book that we've ever talked about on 21st Century Radio, or any book that I've written or Zahara's written. This is a very important seminal work that you really need to learn. Well, I believe that. I'll be back with our guest, Douglas George, in just a few minutes. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Our guest is Douglas George, Good Pine, and we're about to discuss Iroquois Culture and Commentary, Clear Light Publications, and as I said before, you purchase a copy of this book, and if you can prove it to me, and that's relatively easy to do, any book that we've ever written, any book that any guest that we've had for the past quarter of a century, we still got books from those that, our guests are very generous with us, and they know we don't sell anything. Our job is to pass on information to help educate people. That's what our key job is here on 21st Century Radio. Doug, how did Dr. Barbara Mann and Jerry Fields determine that the world's first United Nations, the League of the Iroquois, was founded on August the 31st, 1142 A.D.?
That's because they gave full credence to the oral traditions. See, the idea that there was a cohesive political group that had democratic principles was something that the Americans were reluctant to accept for many generations because they were wedded to the myth that Indian people were nomadic and regional and barbaric and simplistic. And when confronted with this idea that, in fact, they were complex people with innovative technologies and people who were given to high political discourse and debate and diplomacy, was dangerous to the myth keepers because it challenged one of the divine principles under which the United States was created, the assumption that we were simplistic people, and that's not the case.
Not at all.
But if they had listened to us, as some of them had in the colonial era, but the great writers of the American story had neglected that, they would have heard us telling them that yes, we did exist at a time long before the Europeans, that the Confederacy stands as the world's oldest United Nations, a truly democratic institution, and it was formed at that specific time. Why? Because that's what our oral traditions tell us. They tell us that it was an ancient league before the people from the salt water came, and that it took place at a certain time in what is now central New York State, when the corn was just before it was about to be harvested, and that it occurred in late summer, and that it occurred when there was an eclipse, as the moon was going between the Earth and the Sun. Now, we knew what eclipses were because we were mathematically inclined. And so all of those things taken together, they came up using their own science and their their knowledge of movement of stars. They were able to figure out that the only conceivable date that this could have occurred was in the afternoon of August 31st on 1142. Not that we were wedded to that specific, in our tradition, to a linear time, but to us that made perfect sense.
Well, it does. I just love the rationality as to how they pinned this down. God bless them for doing that.
It was just a matter of listening to the older ones who had no reason to distort or to exaggerate or lie. And it leads us into another area of discussion, is if that can be verified by hard physical sciences, what else could we learn from the oral traditions? And it goes into this area of where exactly this idea of democracy come from. And our older people, I remember telling us this years ago, that it was a gift by the Aboriginal people, and specifically by the Iroquois, to the world. And again, that was considered heresy among certain academics. The assumption that a primitive people could actually do this was incredible. Mm-hmm. But the documentation that's being uncovered and has been uncovered substantiates that there was intense interaction between the leaders of our confederacy as well as other native nations and those people who became founders of the American nation. Not just politically, but symbolically as well. Our influence runs all through the United States in many, many subtle ways, from the use of certain imagery at that time to the actual design of the United States Congress.
Well, even more basic than that, our food, our medicine.
Yes, virtually everything Americans enjoy today in the way of food came from Native people, and it wasn't casual. I have to emphasize this, and the great historian Jack Weatherford has substantiated what we've been saying for years in his books, Savages and Civilization and Native Roots and Indian Giver. He's just carrying on a message that we first brought to the attention of the American public a couple generations ago, that there's no part of American life that has not been profoundly affected by Native people, whether it's the corn they eat or put into their cars now, or the clothes they wear. That's from a purely technological perspective, our influence has been enormous. We can actually say that the greatest event in human history occurred when the peoples of our respective hemispheres met each other and began to exchange these technologies and these ideas. Certainly the greatest challenge to Christianity occurred when they confronted people who were living in a condition of paradise without the sanctions of the church. That created a huge dilemma for the papacy.
I think one of the greatest personal dilemmas, because I was going to be a priest at one time, was in reading the history of the church and learning that women were not allowed to have a Bible or read the Bible until about maybe 100 and some years ago. I mean, this is amazing. Women were actually considered inferior to men and just above children. And
yes, well, it's in American society underwent that when they finally passed the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. But we know the conditions of oppression still exist in many areas of this planet. The great ally of the United States is Saudi Arabia, which has a terrible record when it comes to acknowledging the inherent rights of the life givers, the women. Mm-hmm. And other European countries didn't fully accept women as having complete political rights until the 1970s. I believe it was some canons in Switzerland that were holding off against this. But it's inconceivable in our generation to think that women were, within our grandmother's time, denied the right to full participation. And but there's a book written by historian Sally Roche Wagner called Sisters in Spirit. And what that book does is it shows the deep connection between the suffragettes of the 19th century and the Iroquois. Yes. They were looking around in the world for an example of where there was gender balance, of where women actually took full part in their society without restriction. And the only place they could find it was literally at their doorstep, and that was amongst the Iroquois. And so a lot of what became the essence of the suffragette demands stemmed directly from the Iroquois. But in another way, it's kind of strange because the founders of communism, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, were also at that very time looking for an example of a people living in a state of classless harmony where all property was exchanged according to need, and it wasn't, people weren't geared towards material wealth but had another imperative. And where did they find that society? Amongst the Iroquois. Yes, yeah. And so if you read The Origin of the Family, they were heavily beholden to a guy called Lewis Henry Morgan, the founder of American anthropology, who wrote the first anthropological work, serious scientific work in the United States called League of the Iroquois in 1852. And again, here we go. Iroquois influence weaving its way through contemporary human history.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have too many questions, Doug, and we're never going to get to most of them, and I'm kind of stymied here as to looking at 35 questions right now. I'm looking at 35 questions I have not asked you. That's why you're probably going to have to stay with us for the next 7 hours so we can get this done right.
Well, if there's nothing else people can learn from what we're talking about here, that is, there's need before Americans can reconcile with this new era of living in a time of limitations, that they have to reconcile with their history. They have to know the truth about who they are. And that means re-examining their relationship with Aboriginal people. And that means acknowledging Aboriginal people as they existed prior to European contact. And there's a really great book called 1491 that I strongly urge people to read. It's written by Charles Mann, and it describes what Native societies were like at a year before formal contact. And it's important that we remove those things that stand in the way of seeing each other as human beings. And that book's a good start. Again, Jack Weatherford's book, Indian Givers, is also a very good place to start. And K. Marie Porterfield's Indian Contributions to the World is absolutely essential for people to understand this.
With some things that are essential, I'm going to jump around and out of order these questions. Being a Virgo, I have problems about jumping around, but I really do, because I like to try to get it all. But why is the Bering Strait migration theory irrational?
Here we go. That's a good one, because it's always brought up that this is a land of immigrants. That's every politician, Democrat, Republican, says that we came from someplace else and that together we forged this thing called the United States of America. Well, you didn't do it in a bubble. Everybody had a little piece to bring with them. And you have to realize that the native people were here first, and they did not come in from Asia. I believe there was a recent scientific search done when they did this genome project, and they couldn't show that there was any direct, immediate connection between the Aboriginal people in America and the dwellers of northeastern part of Asia. There's some kind of weak DNA link, but it's insufficient to substantiate that claim that Native people came from Siberia. And anybody who's got a lick of common sense can look at a map, especially during the Ice Age when it supposedly took place, 12,000 years ago, and say that for a people, any people, to undertake a great trek and go and encounter the terrible conditions, the climatic conditions in northern Siberia, then somehow magically find this 40-mile wide ice bridge only to be confronted by a 2-mile-high glacier on the eastern end, and then somehow magically there's a crevice in this great glacier, and these people walk 1,500 miles or 2,000 miles until they finally enter into what is now Kansas and South Dakota is irrational. Anybody who's taken a walk down the streets of Manhattan can tell you what the effect of channeled wind will do to a human being. And there's no physical evidence to support this. There never will be, because it simply didn't happen. It was a silly idea from the beginning, and if they'd only listened to our elders, we could have told them where Native people came from. Well, it certainly wasn't Asia.
Even through the great documentation that's now taking place for many other anthropologists, archaeologists, scholars. Yes. But it takes such a long time to get this information into our high schools. It's a myth.
When you do this, when you challenge Clovis, as has been rightly challenged, even to the north of you in Pennsylvania, they found this evidence of human occupation in central Pennsylvania going back tens of thousands of years. In Chile, they found 70,000 years backwards, and in the southwest. So Clovis is a theory. The Bering Strait thing is a theory. There's no hard physical evidence. Certainly when the planet warmed up, there might have been some people using the coastal routes, sailing along that that top of the circle. But the real origins come from the south, and we know that because all of our stories have a common theme that runs through them, and that is our point of origin came from what is now Central America. Well, that makes sense linguistically as well.
Indeed. Well, you must be psychic because we're about ready to touch on that. You've been reading my notes here, I see.
Yes.
It says here.
What are the origins? We all need to know where we came from. Yeah. We need to know that. It gives us substance. It tells us the great story about who we are in our own individual families and as nations. Where did we come from? And, Native people say we were directed here and we flourished in our respective territories. And for the Iroquois, our migration story takes place in what is now the Southwest.
Let's touch on that. Let's touch on that when we come back. We need to take a break here because this is really important. This is friends, I learned so much from this book, and that's one of the reasons why I believe you should get a copy of this book. And as we've already said, you buy a copy of this book, you can have any book that we've ever talked about on 21st Century Radio if we still have a copy of that, or any of my books, or Zoe's books, or whatever. Our guest, of course, is Douglas George, Good Pine. And the book that we were talking about is Iroquois Culture and Commentary, Clear Light Publications. And it's really important that the next book we must discuss with him, not tonight, but at some time in the future, Iroquois on Fire, A Voice from the Mohawk Nation. Another great book. Our guest is Douglas George. We are taking some questions from his book, Iroquois Culture and Commentary, Clear Light Publications. Douglas, we started to talk about the origins of the Iroquois, and you started to note that they came from the southwest of the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely right. We, the late philosopher Vine Deloria and myself, organized a series of events in which we brought together the elements, what we'd call traditional knowledge, and one of them was origins. So we asked Hopi people and Anishinaabe people and Inuit people from the Alaskan northern slopes and Mayan peoples. We had one question that we wanted answered at the end of our 3-day session, is that where did we come from? And all the stories point like the trunk of a tree to a certain root. We have branches here and there, but they all come from a certain stem, and that root is in Central America. So then we asked the Mayans, well, where did you come from? If you're the grandfather, the grandmothers of all Aboriginal people in the Americas, where did you come from? And they told us a story that's, again, consistent with the Skywoman epic and dovetails with a lot of other stories and other cultures, and that is how the earth was one day shifted its polarity and was inundated by great water, and that the homeland of Aboriginal people was in an area that is now the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean. And certain things happened. The Earth's balance was upset. This land became immersed in the water, and then the refugees found haven on the hills of what is now Guatemala and Nicaragua. And from there, they went south, and from there, they went north. That's the story as we know it. So we're looking for any intrepid Indiana Jones-type archaeologist there who's willing to, or even Bob Ballard, to take us up on the story, and we'll point them to where the origin was. Mm-hmm. Put your submersibles there, and you'll find the truth. That's it. That's it.
Well, all right. I'm going to say something I never say on our radio show here,
yeah.
But with you and Joanne this studio here has a few other beings in it that haven't been here before.
Where you are right now in Maryland is an area that was a place of great meeting from Native peoples from throughout the East. We had a great trail, a water trail that would go down the Susquehanna and would reach that region, and there would meet other peoples from the coast, and there was a great alliance between the Iroquois Confederacy in the north and then the Powhatan Confederacy in that region where you now are. Mm-hmm. And so it's a great meeting ground. It's for different Native peoples, and the essence of their presence there is certainly felt by anybody who has any degree of sensitivity.
Well, this is, to me, one of the most important questions to ask of all. Women are the center of Iroquois life.
Yes.
How, why, and has it always been this way?
Yeah, it wasn't always that way, because we experienced times when we drifted away from our original instructions, which is why the spiritual being sent this messenger to us, Kanentiio. And he was a guy that is described as having white hair, perhaps an albino with a double row of teeth. And he, despite this impediment, he came to us and managed to persuade us that there was a new way of thinking, that if we recognized natural law, that we would find a way to live in peace with each other. And as I said before, it was the women who first embraced this, because as life givers, they were less eager to surrender their children to warfare and all of that, all of which that entails, than the men were. And so he designed the political system in conjunction with Jugunsase to reflect that reality. So women have very specific powers under our Constitution, our great law. Women are the ones who nominate all leaders. Though every leader has to abide by certain qualification when it comes to personal integrity, stable family life, sensitivity towards the people, and genuine humility. And then it goes through a review process by the clan and then by the nation. So there's a series of things that take place prior to a person becoming what in English would be called a chief. The women had impeachment powers. Now, that's something that was unheard of in Europe, but as part of the United States Constitution was taken directly from us. And that is, if a person who's considered a servant of the people transgresses upon that, the women can meet together and strip that person of their responsibilities. Women control all things that involve life-taking in a way of they are the ones who can veto war, or they could initiate it if they see that it's necessary to protect the community. Capital punishment, which is part of Iroquois life, a person could be executed for forcing himself upon a woman, And they were the ones, the women together as a collective, could decide whether or not to initiate that specific activities. Naturalization, which is a great part of American life. If you understand how the Iroquois created citizens and how the Americans did it, you'll see it's one and the same. And we took somebody who was born of another nation and we made them into Iroquois through formal naturalization process that took a number of years, had certain very strict qualifications, and it's the same thing as the Americans do now. So, and when it comes to material wealth, we know from our study of economics, for those who have studied at Penn State or Wharton School of Economics, you know all true wealth comes from those who are able to control the means of production. And in the Iroquois society, who controlled the means of production? Women.
Of course.
Who decide how property and wealth was distributed. It was our women who did that. Who controlled the names of our children? It was women. And when a man, in a personal level, when a couple married, the man went into the woman's community, entered her world, and lived with her family. And when it comes to divorce, which unfortunately has become all too characteristic of American life, all real property owned by the couple went to the women. And the only thing the man could take was his personal tools and his clothing. And it was the women only who could initiate divorce. So all of that, flowed through the feminine. And you can imagine how people like Washington and Franklin and those fellows would have reacted when they heard about this, and they did hear about it.
Oh, they heard about it, of course. And, well, we know
yes,
the reaction, as I've mentioned in the beginning of the show, was not so good. Well, we blew it as far as I was concerned. Now, we got less than a minute or so here, and I am torn between so many questions here, but I was going to ask you who are a few of the Iroquois' greatest heroes and number of things, but I want to end with this one. Tell us about your heroine grandmother, Josephine Susan Foote.
Oh, she was a great woman. She didn't speak any English. I think maybe her only two words in English, from what my uncle said, was like Greyhound and Syracuse. And the reason is because she was immersed in Mohawk, and when her daughter, my aunt, was a teenager, she went to Syracuse in order to find a job during World War II. And my aunt my grandmother had an amazing ability to sense things before they were happened. She was also a healer. And unfortunately, in 1951, when she was visiting my aunt had just given birth, and there was a fire that took place in Syracuse, and my grandmother had the infant child with her. And the fire was started on the bottom floor of a tailor shop. And as the flames were coming up the stairs, my grandmother had a choice: either save the child or save herself. And there was a crowd, and my grandmother tossed my aunt's baby to the crowd. And my grandmother was a solid woman, very, very physically strong. And she knew that that was the last thing she could do as the flames were coming towards her. And so she jumped out of the building and in doing so died when she hit the ground.
Oh, yeah.
But she was one of those amazing people that could sense things long before they were about to happen. But one of the things about our healers is they cannot heal themselves. And sometimes that vision as to their own fate is denied them. And that was her experience. But she was one of the great Mohawk women.
Was your dad a great lacrosse player?
My uncle was the best lacrosse player in the world. This goes to all you guys at Johns Hopkins and Baltimore, Maryland Community Colleges. When we get our Hiawatha Institute started in Syracuse, you watch out for us.
Well, I got to tell you, I know we're out of time, but when I saw that story that the Iroquois could not compete in the world stage in lacrosse, it was just terrible. It was just.
We got the silver medal last month in playing box lacrosse in Czechoslovakia. Or Czech Republic. We beat the Americans. We came second only to.
Well, we got to go. Darn it. We needed another 5 hours. See you next week on 21st Century Radio. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington, and I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus.